Welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Bruce Johnson, and this is my presentation for Oplerno titled Maintaining an Active Virtual Presence in Online Classes. So to get us started today, let me ask you some questions. First, is distance learning easy for educators? How about your students? Is it easy for them to be involved in virtual learning? Well, the answer for educators is that it depends upon how much time and attention they devote to their class, how focused they are on their students' developmental needs, and more importantly, how engaged they are in the class. This will also determine what type of experience students have as they interact and work in this environment. This presentation will discuss what it means to be actively engaged and present in your online classes. It will also address best practices for maintaining a quality virtual presence. This presentation can also serve as professional development for all online instructors, as it is based upon my background and experience with online faculty development. Next up is our agenda for the presentation. After a brief introduction, I'll talk about distance learning. Then I'll explore a virtual presence and what it means to be seen in an online class, along with elements of a virtual presence and establishing a virtual presence. Then I'll discuss the importance of time management and share time management tips and tools. Finally, I'll share best practices for maintaining a virtual presence, along with additional professional development tips for online instructors. Now I would like to share more about my background with you. As you can see, I have a doctorate in adult education as well as an MBA. I have been an online instructor for 10 years, and I've also been involved in online faculty development. The various roles that I have held included online faculty trainer, mentor, peer reviewer, and workshop facilitator. I have worked with faculty members who have had all levels of experience, from new online instructors to experienced instructors, and instructors who were required to attend a mandatory developmental class as they were struggling with their facilitation duties. I'm also a published author. I've published 3 ebooks, and my dissertation was published in paperback and as an ebook, which I'll share more about with you next. I also write weekly blog posts and publish articles on LinkedIn. At the end of our presentation, I'll share some of my social media contacts if you'd like to connect with me and learn more about my work. I'm very involved in the use of social media, as it has a capacity to connect with a global audience of both educators and students. In fact, I was discovered by Oplerno through my social media presence, and to date I have developed 3 courses for Oplerno, all related to online teaching. As to my specific contributions to the field of distance learning, my dissertation study was focused on the development of an instructional strategy for the field of distance learning. I took an organizational development technique called appreciative inquiry and translated it for distance learning, and I called the strategy appreciative andragogy. The reason why I liked appreciative inquiry is that it's strengths-based and it's focused on the development of performance, motivation, and engagement. The title of my dissertation was Appreciative Andragogy, Taking the Distance Out of Distance Learning. The results of my research study were published in the Online Learning Journal, and I will also be presenting the results of this study this October at the Online Learning Consortium's 2015 International Online Learning Conference. Now, let's take a look at the field of distance learning. This is a field that I'm very interested in and one that I continue to research and write about. As we know, the field of distance learning is also referred to as online learning and e-learning. There are some general statements that we can make about this field. First, the basic principles of adult learning do not change, especially related to how a student acquires and processes information. But it is the format of learning that has changed. And this means that traditional instructors must find a method of adapting their teaching methods, as meeting once a week in a virtual class will not be enough to promote learning. What makes the online learning experience unique is the fact that the online classroom is always open and students may be working in class at almost any given time of the day. Another factor that makes this form of learning unique, as well as a challenge for both educators and students alike, is the primary form of communication, which is written posts and messages. This is how communication takes place and how relationships are established based upon what is written. Now, of course, there are interactive methods of communication that can be added, but what I'm referring to is the primary manner that is established within online classes. Let's now talk about online teaching requirements. An online instructor is responsible for many important tasks when they are assigned to a class. They must know their subject matter well, manage the class, complete their required duties, develop relationships, address students' developmental needs, among many other important tasks. Now, there is a misconception that you cannot help students if you cannot see them. Some students are drawn to online learning because of the anonymity factor, and that means you may never see them, even if you build in synchronous communication methods. However, it is still possible that you can assist your students, even if you have to rely solely upon written communication. Now let's consider online teaching challenges. There are many possible challenges for online teaching, and I've learned about these potential issues through my own teaching experience and background working with online faculty. One of these challenges for instructors is that students can easily disengage from the class, and by the time an instructor notices it, it may be too late to re-engage them. Something else I have observed is that how students perform is often directly influenced by the level of engagement of the instructor in their class. An instructor's virtual presence is also a social presence, and that helps to build a community of learners. There are some additional challenges I have observed as an online faculty peer reviewer. It can be easy for new instructors, and even those who have been teaching online for quite some time, to view online teaching as a function rather than a process that needs to be nurtured. There's also a difference between someone who is an instructor versus someone who is an educator. And what I mean by that is that a subject matter expert does not automatically equate to an effective instructor. I've also observed instructors who put in only the minimal effort required into their class, which again doesn't create an engaging learning experience. Time management. This is also an issue for many instructors, especially those who are adjuncts. And putting off tasks until the end of the class week is the quickest way to miss deadlines. We will address time management during this presentation, as an instructor must have a schedule if they are going to be able to be actively engaged in their class. Other issues have included a lack of preparation and being actively present only when they were required to do so. For example, if the minimum requirement for your school is 3 times per week as far as being online and being engaged, that is likely not enough to produce an interactive learning environment. Next, let's talk about a virtual presence and what it means to be seen. Before we begin to talk about an instructor's virtual presence, let's consider your student's perspective. Students have perceptions about their class, as well as their instructors and even the school, whether it's right, wrong, or otherwise. Those perceptions can be positive or negative. Students can also hold expectations about what they expect to do while they are enrolled in their classes, as well as what they expect of their instructors as far as what they should do and how they expect them to be involved in class. New students often face the reality of learning about the validity of their expectations, which can be very challenging for them. As a general rule, students want to see the instructor in class on a regular basis, and an instructor's presence is often equated with their involvement, care, and concern for the students. Now, in traditional classes, students can see and hear their instructors. With online classes, students are looking for other clues since there is an absence of direct contact. Students will quickly assess the level of involvement based upon what they see their instructor do and what they perceive. Now, let's address what it means to be seen. From one perspective, it means to be accessible. This will answer the question, how are you accessible? The standard online classroom template usually includes a question forum or thread, but do you believe that is enough for your students? Some instructors would say yes, but if you consider the student's perspective, the answer would be no. An instructor needs multiple methods of contact. Some of the options an instructor can use include email, phone calls, instant messaging, Skype, and the Canvas synchronous meeting feature, which you can see on the bottom of the slide. What do multiple contact forms do for your students? Well, it offers them reassurance that they can get help and that they can find you when needed. This is especially important when they feel stuck and frustrated, and it certainly goes a long way towards helping them stay engaged in the class. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to be available 24/7, but do offer them alternatives that they can use based upon their level of need. Next, another perspective for a virtual presence is your responsiveness to students. What does not change with an online class is the students' need for one-on-one interactions with each other and with their instructors. Why does responsiveness matter? Being responsive helps to build relationships, which creates an environment that is conducive to and supportive of productive exchanges. Being responsive also means that you are showing genuine concern for their academic well-being, which creates positive feelings and builds connections. Students will be more likely to reach out to you again when needed if you have been responsive to them. Responsiveness also depends upon your disposition. Your disposition is conveyed in the tone of what you write and speak. It can motivate or demotivate your students. For example, sending out a quick response to a student's question and telling them, "See the syllabus," is not as effective as writing a thoughtful reply and stating, "Let me help you." Always ask yourself this question: how would you, as a student, want your instructor to respond? Next, let's consider some elements of a virtual presence. First up, an important element of an instructor's virtual presence is classroom management. As you know, you need to be in control of the class and monitor the class conditions. Will you be able to effectively accomplish this if you are only logged onto the class twice a week? It is highly unlikely, as you may not be monitoring everything that occurs in the class until, well, after the fact. When you are actively present and engaged in your class, you can be proactive instead of reactive to class conditions. You will know what is taking place, and you can provide guidance immediately and as needed. Now, classroom management can include all details of the classroom, even down to checking links to resources that you've provided to ensure that they are working for students. Here's a challenge for instructors. It may be easy to assume that your class is going well if there are no complaints or no apparent classroom issues. But the reason why this is an issue is that you may have students who are missing or disengaging from the class. What this reminds you is that you always need to be aware of your students and how they are progressing. Another important element of a virtual presence is your class discussions. This is a very important component of your class. Your active participation in class discussions encourages your students to be involved, as they will likely follow your lead. The reason why your involvement is so important is that you can help to guide their comprehension and analysis of the course topics, and you can help to prompt their critical thinking skills in your follow-up post. One of my favorite tools to use, even with online discussions, is a form of Socratic questioning. And this means I end everything that I post in reply to a student with a directed question that helps to extend the conversation or particular student's thread. There is another tool that you can use called the ABCs model, which stands for A, acknowledge something the student has written in your post or follow-up reply. B, build from it by adding your expertise, examples, and/or experience. And then C, conclude with a question. From my own experience, I have found it helpful to post a reply to each student at least once. I also assign separate points for the discussion question post and the participation post as a means of encouraging their involvement. Your active virtual presence means that you are well aware of the discussion threads and what is being posted, and you can guide, correct, and redirect student conversations when needed. You can also be on the lookout for any negative interactions. Also, for class discussions, consider these questions. Do you want your students to be actively engaged in the class discussions? Do you want them to utilize sources to support their analysis? Do you want them to format their citations correctly within their discussion post? If the answer is yes, then you need to model all of these qualities. And this is an approach to instruction that requires an investment of time. Now, another benefit of frequent posts is that it helps to replicate the interactive nature of traditional class discussions. I've also observed as a peer reviewer that there is a correlation between the amount of time an instructor spends in their class to the quality of their post. There are substantive posts which take time, and then there are minimally developed posts which often appear to be hurriedly put together. The choice is always yours. Next, let's now talk about establishing a virtual presence. All right, one of the components needed to establish a virtual presence is having a scheduled online presence. This means that you establish specific days of the week that you will be online, along with specific times that you will be working in the classroom. This establishes a routine and develops a sense of consistency, both for you and your students. Adjunct instructors are typically online during the evening hours, which mirrors the times when students are often in the classroom. It doesn't matter if you match your students' time exactly all of the time, but it does help them to know you are there and available on a fairly regular basis. There is an aspect of establishing hours that is debated by instructors, and that is working on the weekend. I consider this to be a non-traditional role, and therefore I'm not working a typical 9-to-5 job, which means I found that I need to be online at least one day on the weekend. I'm often using that time to finalize feedback and prepare posts for the new class week. Some instructors believe they should have the entire weekend off, and that can vary by school as to the expectation or requirement for being in the classroom. As a general rule, try not to take every weekend off. At some point, check in. Make sure there are no issues or concerns, especially during a time when there's a due date, a project due, an assignment due, something that may cause them concern or have questions. It will certainly benefit your students in the long run. Next, I would caution you, and I speak from experience here, when I say be sure you do give yourself some downtime. I have certainly been caught up at times with the always on syndrome, where I am tethered to technology and never switch it off. I've learned, and I hope you will too, that you need a break every week to renew and recharge. Now, another component needed for establishing a virtual presence is your availability. We have already considered how you will be accessible. Now we'll consider when you are available. This ties into the previous point about a scheduled online presence. Establish a schedule and be consistent. This encourages students to contact you. Whatever you decide, it is always a good idea to let students know when you will be available. You may even decide to state it in the course syllabus. Another suggestion that you may find helpful is to hold office hours. I've worked for a school that required office hours on certain days of the week and certain times, and other schools that had no requirement. I believe it is helpful to hold office hours so that students learn to feel comfortable asking you questions or asking you for assistance. Availability should also include checking email during the day. Now, this is more challenging for adjuncts if they are unable to log on to the classroom or check email during the day. But once again, establish a routine and communicate what you are doing to your students, and you can even publish it in a post or the syllabus. My schedule is typically set to work Monday through Thursday in the classroom and one day on the weekend. Now, of course, this will vary based upon the needs of the class and the students. However, that is a typical pattern that I follow. Next, we are going to explore a topic that is directly related to maintaining an active virtual presence, and that is your time management plan. Online teaching can be demanding as to the number of tasks required, especially for adjunct instructors. Why is a time management plan so important? You want to develop a schedule and a plan to maximize your productivity. This will help you to avoid missed deadlines and avoid overlooking students who are struggling or missing from class. When you are effectively managing your time, you have minimized distractions and time wasters, which also reduces the possibility of stress and feeling anxiety. A time management plan also helps to improve your timeliness with your facilitation responsibilities. Be certain to schedule time for answering questions, responding to emails, and returning phone calls. And be transparent with your students so they are aware of your schedule. Timeliness is also very important with feedback as an instructional duty. I found as a peer reviewer that the amount of time spent on feedback is equivalent to the quality of the feedback provided, and that would seem to make sense. Why is timely and substantive feedback important for your students? Well, their developmental needs would be the most important reason of all. They need your feedback to improve. Establish a time frame for when your feedback is due. Of course, some schools have a mandatory return deadline, and let your students know what it is. Of course, the sooner you complete the feedback, the better, but at least establish the expectation for your students. Now, let's talk about some time management tools. And the first one that I found very helpful and I've shared with faculty for many years is called the chunking method. This is especially helpful for providing feedback. The basic premise is to break down large tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks. For example, I have always recommended to faculty that they break down their feedback process into several days and complete a certain number of students or review a certain number of papers per day. What this does is help avoid the last-minute rush, especially if you start early in the week. If a class day ends on Sunday, I would usually start working on my feedback on Monday to make certain I had enough time and never felt behind. Consider the benefit of having more time to complete your feedback. You can monitor student papers for originality, delve into the content of the paper and provide comments, and you can also take time to address the mechanics of what was written, including the formatting styles. Next, I have a time management technique that I've been teaching to students and faculty members, one that I believe you may find helpful to use anytime you want to review how well you manage your time, and that involves using a time log to track your time. You can create a time log rather quickly with a Word document and a chart. I've got one here on the slide for you to look at. What I usually do is include a column for time slots during a typical workday, a column to list facilitation duties and activities, and a column for notes. Then I insert time slots in usually 30-minute increments. Then take 1 week and use this time log each day of the week. After the week has concluded, take time to look for trends. Consider the deadlines you had that week and how often you participated in class discussions. It's likely that you'll be surprised how your time was used and areas that you can either work on, or it can confirm how well you've done with your time for that week. Next, here are some additional time management tips to help you have the time to maintain a strong virtual presence. When you create a time management plan, be sure to schedule all of your facilitation tasks, including participation, feedback, classroom management, preparation, and development of new posts. Take advantage, too, of tools that you are comfortable with, such as a calendar or to-do list. Now, I still use a paper planner and calendar, as I like to have a document nearby that I can refer to. Some instructors utilize tech tools, and if you're comfortable with tech tools, then make it work for you. Some will even allow you to set up alerts or reminders. Finally, whenever you have pockets of unexpected time during the week, you can use this either for downtime, or you can use it to work ahead and be prepared for the upcoming week. Next, I have some additional time management tips to help you have the time to maintain your strong virtual presence. You may find it helpful to consider your energy levels and work when you have the most energy. Of course, if you have that flexibility in your time plan. You will also find it beneficial to tie your time management plan to your teaching goals. So, for example, as an instructor, do you want to have enough time to just meet the minimum required duties, or would you like to have enough time to exceed the required minimum tasks and be highly engaged and present? Once you develop a time management plan, do your best to follow it. Otherwise, procrastination can set in, no matter how well you have planned your week ahead of time. Now let's turn our attention to best practices for maintaining a virtual presence. One helpful best practice is to maintain a supportive approach. Anytime you shine a spotlight on students' performance, you may find some are uncomfortable, they might feel threatened, and some may even feel fearful, especially when you ask questions or provide personalized feedback. What they believe they did regarding their performance or the effort they have made in class may be different than what you have evaluated. What you don't want this to do is to create a separation between you and them, or create frustration or cause them to disengage from the class. Your support is needed to nurture a growth mindset in your students, which involves developing productive habits and behaviors. A growth mindset determines if they will persist and keep trying, or if they'll just simply stop and give up. Another helpful best practice is to develop mastery of your own academic skills. Remember that your words and posts now represent you. This is especially true for discussion posts and within every discussion thread in class. It is also relevant for the feedback you provide, along with every written interaction in your class, including your responses to students when you answer their questions. Consider the impact of poorly written and formatted posts. What impressions does this give to your students? Also, consider how students are trying to develop their own academic skills. Now, if they observe poorly written, developed, or formatted posts, how will they learn? I have always taken a proactive approach and provided resources for students, both in the classroom and with the feedback provided, especially when they have developmental needs. If you find and utilize resources to help your own skill set development, share those with your students. I'm certain they'll appreciate it. Another best practice is to be an example to your students. This ties into everything we've already discussed. Establish a high standard of excellence for yourself and hold yourself accountable. Be fully engaged in the learning process and actively participating. Be concerned with academic integrity. Post well-crafted messages and documents. Do your best to skillfully manage your class. Next, the last planned topic I have for us today is additional professional development tips for online instructors. First, here's a tip for you. You're not just an instructor. You are a facilitator, which is a common word used with for-profit schools. You're also an educator, a mentor, a coach, and a teacher. And at the heart of all of these roles is the developmental needs of your students. You are responsible for offering constructive feedback, support, and guidance. Another tip, and also a reminder, is that your attitude matters. How you feel, your mindset, and your attitude are all reflected in your tone and your interactions. Your students will pick up on a negative disposition very quickly. Another tip, determine what you expect of your students ahead of time. Make certain that your students know what is expected of them and that they have the resources necessary to succeed. For example, if there are new students and they are required to learn APA formatting, you could provide links, a sample paper, etc. In summary, a virtual presence humanizes the learning experience for a technology-enabled classroom. This helps students believe that they belong to a community versus taking a correspondence course or just being part of a group of student identification numbers. So what we've talked about is what it means to be seen in a virtual class. First, we considered your student's perspective, then the importance of accessibility, responsiveness, and a positive disposition. We've also discussed elements of a virtual presence. That includes classroom management and classroom discussions. And we've talked about establishing a virtual presence. That means having a scheduled online presence and being available. We also consider time management and its role in establishing a virtual online presence. In conclusion, what you want is to bridge the gap. You want to bridge the distance gap between yourself and your students. Teach them the powerful potential of distance learning, as well as the value of education. Your involvement, which is your active virtual presence, influences how students respond to the virtual classroom environment, how they perform, and how well their developmental needs are met. I've provided some of my social media links for you if you would like to connect with me. And I thank you for attending this presentation today. And I hope you have gained something of value to use to establish a strong virtual presence.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you for your interesting talk. Sorry, I'm very happy to have been able to talk to you and to know which camera I'm on. But thank you. It's been really, really good and really, really interesting.
Thank you.
I learned a lot, certainly, about and being able to give feedback to our faculty and to our students as well. I think there's a lot of things that can also be learned. Could you tell me a little bit more about? You have courses on Oplerno, you said?
Yes. Yes, I've got advanced online teaching strategies for students. So if you're just starting out as an online instructor and you kind of want to look ahead, or if you've been teaching online for a while and you want a refresher, this is really a class to advance your teaching strategies, to renew and refresh what you're doing now. I also offer Take the Distance Out of Distance Learning, which is based upon my dissertation study, which I mentioned early in the presentation. It's a unique class, and it follows through the application of appreciative inquiry to distance learning, and also provides tools and strategies to develop your own strengths-based approach to online teaching. And then the third class is Adult Education Basics for Online Instructors. And this will really help.
Sorry, we lost your sound there for a moment at the end. Oh dear, sorry.
That's okay. Do you want me to start over?
No, I don't have any sound for you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh.
Oh, it shows it's here.
Strange. Okay, well, at least thank you, Dr. Johnson, for your for talking to us and taking the time. I know it was difficult fitting us in, and so thank you very much. And yeah, sorry about the sound. That's technology for you.
That's okay. Thank you.
Okay, bye bye.